Welcome back to the Training of Apple podcast. I'm your host, Dave Schell, and today I am flying solo. The last time we talked was right before Leadville. You were able to sit in and listen to one of our team calls, and so I thought today I'd just kind of come back and give a quick recap of Leadville, and then also address how to handle training this time of year, because it can be a bit odd. So first off, let's just start talking about Leadville. I raced it along with many of my athletes. This is the first time that I was actually able to get in through the lottery. So by default, I was going to be in one of the brown corral. And so you can always improve your position by racing one of the lifetime events and then improving your corral that way. I had raced a lifetime event back in 2023, Lutzen, in Minnesota, and thankfully they let me use that result to improve my corral to the blue corral. And so that will come into play here in a little bit. But yeah, it was a great day, definitely full of some learning experiences. I think one of the biggest things that I learned was just how much traffic impacts this event, and that's why the corral is such a huge deal. And so if you're ever planning on racing Leadville, definitely race one of the qualifiers and try to improve your corral, because you're at a disadvantage if you're having to start behind either slower riders or just people that aren't as proficient on the mountain bike as you. And I'll be the first to say that for the longest time, I would always say that Leadville is essentially a gravel race. But that really doesn't give it credit for some very steep, fast, and pretty technical descents. So we're talking about Powerline, talking about the top of Columbine, and some other spots too, where it can get pretty rutted out. It can get pretty loose. I think a lot of athletes were complaining about how loose it was this year and how just kind of chunky and things along those lines. And so, yes, you're having to race against people who may not be as fit as you, but also if their skill level isn't as high as yours, then you might be having to contend with them on the descents as well, which can definitely eat into your time. And so I started in the blue corral. It starts with a very fast road descent, slight descent. So very fast, and then you hit a dirt road, and that goes into the first climb, which is Sugarloaf, or St. Kevin's rather. And that can be your first bottleneck. And so it's essentially wall-to-wall people. A lot of people are off their bikes. A lot of people are, they're riding four abreast. And so, at that point, I'm on my bike. I'm able to stay on my bike, but you're essentially just balancing in place and waiting for little openings so that you can kind of slip through. And I guess I should have started by saying that my goal this year was to go sub 9. And so I had my checkpoints or my timestamps written on my top tube so that I knew where I had to be at certain places. And so the first one was what time I had to be at the top of St. Kevin's, where I had to be at the top of Sugarloaf, where I had to be at Twin Lakes, and so on. And so, I'm kind of racing like a madman, trying to pick my way through people and trying to make up as much time as I can and trying to get ahead of people. Then we go down the first road descent or the second road descent, which is also extremely fast. And at that point, you're just dropping, I put down the dropper post, you get as small as possible, and you're just ripping down that road as fast as you can. And then that takes you into the next climb, which is Sugarloaf and Hagerman Pass Road. And this is where I'll pause and I'll say that I made one of the cardinal sins that I always tell my athletes when they're wanting to take advantage of marginal gains and they want the fastest tire or the fastest lube. I always say the fastest tire is the one that keeps you on the bike, meaning the one that you know how it's going to handle so you're not crashing, and it's robust enough or tough enough that you're not getting punctures and on the side of the road having to fix flats. Well, one of my athletes about 2 or 3 weeks prior to the race had texted me saying that he was going to try these tires and that he heard about them on a podcast, and I'll link to the podcast in the show notes. So I listened to the podcast, and then I reached out to this guy who's been doing real-world rolling resistance testing on tires. And he was kind enough to share his spreadsheet with me, and I kind of vetted these tires, and I thought it looked pretty legit that with these tires, you could potentially save 20 minutes over 105 miles. So I ended up changing tires, which I rarely would do, but 20 minutes is pretty significant. And so going up Sugarloaf, I was taking lots of bad lines and having to ride through the rocks and passing people and just riding really aggressive. And right when I get to the top, I hear psss. I pull over, I pull out my Stan's darts, and I try to stab it in the tire, and it ends up breaking and falling in the rocks, and I can't see it. And so I tilt the tire to the bottom, or the puncture to the bottom, and kind of shake it, trying to get sealant to go in there. It seems like it seals. I start to ride, I add a little bit of air, start to ride again, and I hear it again. So then I have to pull over, and I have to put in a tube at that point. So I believe that cost me about 12 minutes. And then in addition to that, all the people that I had just passed ended up passing me again. So now I'm having to pass them going down power line. And I was riding like a man possessed. I don't think I've ever taken so many risks on a descent, but I was riding in the really bad lines and the loose stuff, the blown out stuff, and just passing as many people as I could because I knew I was kind of behind my time goals now. And so from that point on, I was just kind of like solo TTing, trying to get to Twin Lakes and make up those 12 minutes. So I rode pretty hard, got to Twin Lakes, had a fantastic crew, kind of flew in there, took off my Camelback, which was the plan. So I tossed them my Camelback. They handed me a couple bottles to go up Columbine. I yelled that I needed tubes and darts. So I go up Columbine, and this is probably the next place that I kind of learned about this race. Is it's one thing we as a team, me and my athletes had ridden several sections of the course over 3 days, and we'd ridden it multiple times. And so it's one thing to ride these sections on separate days, but to ride Columbine after you've already been riding for 4 hours or so, it definitely takes a much bigger toll. And you get to the top, you're getting lightheaded, get to the goat trail, it's hike a bike, and then you're coming down, and it's just like you're flying, but then there's two-way traffic and it's loose. And so, yeah, you definitely get a different appreciation for it when you're riding it in the middle of the race. So then I'm coming back to Twin Lakes. I hit the double track, and it's a really fast double track. If you've ever been there spectating, you can see people just flying by, especially the pros. As soon as I hit that, all of a sudden I can feel my back wheel just all over the place. And so the tube had punctured. And so at this point, I'm about a mile or a mile and a half away from Twin Lakes. I know, I don't have a tube. I don't have any darts. There's not really much I can do. And I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm going to walk this mile and a half. And so I just kind of rode it on the rim back to Twin Lakes, get in there. And at this point I was thinking my day was over, but luckily one of my athletes' husbands was there and happened to have a tire and was able to seat the tire with a couple of CO2s, which I wouldn't even thought of doing, but I was like, brilliant. So surprisingly, that only took about 8 minutes. So we were able to swap tires, get it seated, air it up, and I was out of there within 8 minutes. And so at this point, I knew my day was kind of over. I wasn't going to hit the under 9 hours. And so from that point on, I was taking it a little less seriously, I mean, I was still racing hard, but I was taking more time at aid stations. I was drinking lots of Coke. I got a little bit nauseous, which is the kind of the third thing that I learned is I, in flying in the face of the current advice that everybody's doing like 90 grams per hour and 120 grams per hour and so on, I kind of dialed back and went back to what I used to do this year and was just doing scratch and cliff blocks. So aiming for around 50 to 60 grams of carbs per hour or 200 to 240 grams of carbs per hour. But the week before the race, I started thinking, I'm going to be at higher altitude. Maybe I want a little bit extra energy. I'm going to be out there for a long time. And so I decided to add a bit of a scratch high carb to my scratch so that I could bump up the caloric intake a little bit. And so around 7 hours in, I just got really nauseous and just couldn't stand the thought of sugar anymore. And so at that point, all bets are off and I'm just really taking in whatever I can. I was doing never seconds, which I was getting from the aid stations because it was something I could just get it down in one gulp versus having to chew Cliff Blocks, and then Coke. So that kind of got me through at that point. And then I think kind of the last thing that I learned was power line, how much walking there was in power line and when it actually starts. I was really surprised. It's essentially you come around a turn and people are already off their bikes and it's just a conga line of people pushing their bikes. And yeah, maybe I could have stayed on the bike and tried to weave my way through, but it felt like it was like going to cost so much more energy to try to do that I just decided to take the break and kind of let the heart rate come down and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, I think I ended up finishing around 9:25 with 20 minutes due to flats. So I definitely think I'll be going back next year and using what I learned. But again, the big takeaways are, nothing new on race day, which is what we always preach. But sometimes when we're trying to get those marginal gains, we don't listen to our own advice. But definitely an awesome race and an awesome experience. And I think probably the biggest thing for me was just spending the week up there with my athletes and being able to ride with them each day. And we had a team dinner and it was just super fun. So definitely a good team kind of community building event that I liked. So moving on, now we're in September. This is always a weird kind of time of year for me and my athletes. A lot of athletes, probably you're finishing up your last big race in like August or September, and then you get through it and you're kind of tired. Your next race probably isn't going to be until next May or June, but there's still good weather. And so this is something we're always talking about. How do we handle this time of year and what should we be doing this time of year? And so I think there's a lot of opportunities here. If you live somewhere like Colorado where it's going to get cold and it's going to snow, I think that we really want to take advantage. This is an awesome time to ride. The leaves are changing. The weather's cooler. Lots of good riding to be had. And so some athletes, I'll tell them, use this for adventure rides. If there's things you've been wanting to do all year, but you haven't because you were focused on your goal event, let's use that fitness and just, go on some adventure rides. Go ride with friends that you haven't ridden with. Go, if you want to run, if you want to do some hiking, just take advantage. The other thing is taking advantage of that fitness that you have. So even if you weren't signed up for any more races, but the motivation is still high, the stoke is still high, and there's a few races that kind of spark your interest, there's no reason that you need to train very specifically for them. You have all this great fitness that you've built all year, especially if you've done a big event like Leadville. You can just kind of coast off that fitness into the fall, into winter rather. So again, it doesn't have to be super specific. We can add in a little bit, like a few efforts here and there. And I'm a big fan of fartleks, which is just speed play. So you're out on a ride, and when the spirit moves you, you put in a few hard digs here and there and just kind of like touch the top end, make sure get the muscles going, get your brain talking to your legs, and then drop into some races. And it can be really fun because you have this crazy fitness, but then you don't have the stress of those A races hanging over your head. And so a lot of times you can have some really good results because you're just out there for fun. And so you kind of hit that flow state and aren't as concerned about it. This is another good time of year to work on skills. So if skills are something that might be lacking for you, then this is an awesome time. Either if you're a gravel cyclist and you have a mountain bike, pull out the mountain bike and go hit the trail and kind of work on those skills and try to refine those a bit for next year. If you don't have a mountain bike, then take your gravel bike on some single track or some more technical stuff that you typically wouldn't do. I always think about this in terms of video games. So if you're somebody who plays video games or somebody that does, there's this concept of leveling up. So as you're playing and you accumulate experience points and stuff like that, you level up. And when you level up, everything that you had done up to that point becomes easier. And so I look at riding the same way and the type of terrain you're doing and stuff like that. And so if we're thinking about the gravel bike and you take it, if you're typically riding dirt roads that might be washboarded and maybe a little bit loose and some steep stuff, but not like single track and not like technical stuff necessarily. Well, if you get on single track and get used to riding that, then when you go back to your dirt roads, everything is going to be way easier in comparison. And same thing with mountain biking is if let's say you're already you're a good mountain biker and you haven't touched the gravel bike most of the season, pull out that gravel bike again, take it on single track. And then when you get back on the mountain bike, it's just going to feel so much easier because you've got the wider tires, you've got suspension. With the gravel bike, you have to be much cleaner with your technique because you don't have those big fat tires and you don't have the suspension. So you're going to feel everything. And so you learned how to ride with a little bit more finesse and you can't make as many mistakes. And so when you go back to the mountain bike, that's going to carry over and you're going to ride with a little bit more skill. So what are some of the things that you should focus on when we talk about these skills? I always say that so much of riding, especially off-road riding, comes down to weight management. And what I mean by that is it's not your weight, it's not how much you weigh, but it's thinking about your center of mass in relation to the bottom bracket. And so this goes into when we're climbing, we want to kind of be in front of it. When we're descending, we want to be behind it. When we're turning, we want to be over it. And so just always thinking about where's that center of mass in relation to that bottom bracket, because that's going to keep you secure. The other thing when I talk about weight management is really managing your weight, your center of mass, in relation to the terrain. So there's these natural undulations in the terrain where maybe there's a little rocky outcropping and you need to go up on it. Well, rather than just smashing into it, unweighting your front wheel a little bit so that it doesn't impede your momentum, and then you just kind of float up and over it. And so these are things that you can work on, is just really thinking about how you and your bike interact with the terrain and how it's going to be the most efficient. The other thing that I think a lot of gravel cyclists could benefit is just learning to descend. I think we've talked about this before, but if you're going down a fairly steep, loose road, I see a lot of people that are just like planted on their seat and maybe one pedal's down and it's chaos, right? And they're looking right in front of their wheel. And so it feels very scary. But if you kind of stand up and put your weight on those pedals, get off of the saddle so that you have a little bit of built-in suspension with your knees, and then have light hands on the bars, now it becomes where all your weight or your center of mass is kind of in the base of the bike, and so it's going to keep you glued to the road. And then as you hit those irregularities in the road, your knees are going to absorb that, and you're not going to get bucked off the bike. There's a huge difference between being on the saddle and hitting bumpy stuff and being out of the saddle with your knees bent and hitting bumpy stuff. And then, like I said, the last piece of this when you're descending is really thinking about your vision. I know for a lot of people, especially if they're newer, they look right in front of their wheel, and it just makes things scary as hell because it's coming at you so fast. But if you look up the trail, 20 feet, 30 feet, or road, then it's going to slow things down. And our brains are really good at processing things subconsciously, like in the background. We don't have to think about it. As long as you're looking, when you're going over it, your brain's going to know what to do with it. And so just looking ahead is going to slow things down and give you a much better sense of control. Then, when we think about cornering, this is something I just had an athlete out here recently doing a skills weekend. And one of the things we talked about was, rather than thinking turning your bike, think of cornering and leaning the bike. I think that's something that can get people in trouble, is that we think of, I want to turn, so we turn the bars. But that's when we're off-road, especially at speed, we definitely don't want to turn the bars. So it's more about leaning the bike. And so when you lean the bike, that front wheel's going to kind of turn just a little bit, but it's really about like carving those turns. And when you do that, think about putting the weight on the outside foot and your inside hand. And that's going to help you feel a lot more confident going into those corners. And then again, thinking about the vision, don't look in front of you, look to the exit of the turn. And so keeping your eyes ahead, looking where you want to go, and your body's going to naturally follow that. So I think those are just some basic things that you can work on. And there's lots of other skills too. And so I think just going on YouTube, Googling some of the other skills, but this is an awesome time. If this is low-hanging fruit for you, if your fitness is already really good, but you're losing time on descents or through technical sections, the exciting thing about working on skills is that the results and improvements come along so much faster than fitness does. So I would say maybe set that as a goal for your fall is, again, get your gravel bike off-road, gravel bike on a single track, or pull out the mountain bike and hit some trail, and really work on those skills rather than trying to hang on to the fitness that you built all year. And then, like I said, go on some adventure rides, take advantage of the weather while you can, and then once it snows or once it gets too cold out to ride outside, that can be your indicator that it's time to take your off-season break. And for me, most of my athletes, that off-season break is usually only a week or two. And I think the biggest thing that I really try to consider is motivation. I never want athletes to be burned out. And so I think that off-season, a lot of times it's less about their physical recovery. It's more about mental recovery. And so just kind of getting a reset, getting excited to ride again. And for me, I feel like the biggest indicator that it's time to get on the bike again is when you're really chomping at the bit. If you're having to talk yourself to get on the bike, if you're having to talk yourself to get on the trainer, then it's probably not time yet. So give yourself some time, renew that stoke, and then once you're chomping at the bit, that's the time to start training again. I think for me, the unofficial start of the season always tends to be around November, because most people, I really like to have at least 6 months before your big race. So if people are racing in May, then November gives you that 6 months. But if your race is earlier than that, then then you'll have to get started before that. But just some considerations there, and we'll do a follow-up podcast maybe in the next couple of weeks and really talk about how to use that off-season and how to review this season or the past season and then start to plan for next year. So thanks for listening. If you have any questions on this, don't hesitate to hit me up on Instagram at Kaizen Endurance, or you can send me an email at dave@kaizenendurance.coach. As always, thanks for listening. And if you're ever looking for help, if you want the help and guidance of a coach, don't be afraid to reach out. Or if you just want to consult, we do those too. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care.